I'm not saying this is the greatest comedy ever made, but I'm also not saying it. Now, when it comes to comedies, I really enjoy them, but if we're looking at them just from like a critical analytical standpoint, they do tend to be kind of empty calorie movies a lot of times. For example, I love early Adam Sandler movies like Happy Gilmore and The Waterboy, but they're not really about anything. You know, they're just an unhinged man-child giving in to his intrusive thoughts and somehow winding up with a girl way out of his league. They're fun wish fulfillment. And there's nothing wrong with that. That has its place. If all you watch is Citizen Kane and 12 Angry Men, you're gonna go fucking crazy. But my favorite type of comedy is satire. Satire is what happens when a comedy actually has something to say. And at its best, satire is a weapon that skewers people and ideologies and institutions that need to be taken down a peg. And for my taste, a satire should be harsh and recklessly unrestrained in its parody. So, with that in mind, it should be no surprise that I am a big fan of the following film. Welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. I'm your host Daniel, and today we are talking about Blazing Saddles. Now, Blazing Saddles is a Western parody that was released in 1974. This is one of the earlier Mel Brooks films. They were released the same year as Young Frankenstein, but earlier in the year. The movie is set in 1874 and follows the adventures of a former slave named Bart, who becomes the first ever black sheriff of a small western town. Now, that setup didn't already tip you off. This movie is infamous for its relentless racial humor, including gratuitous use of a certain word that begins with an N and rhymes with bigger.
Hey, the sheriff is near.
What did he say? The sheriff is near.
No, got a blaming thing running. The sheriff is near.
It is wild, it is uncomfortable, but it's not mindless. This satire isn't targeting a company or a politician or an annoying social trend or anything like that. This is a satire that is attacking racism itself. Now, there's a few reasons I think the movie does this. The first is that it is a parody of Westerns. And Westerns, especially the old-fashioned ones, were a pretty white-centric genre. They often didn't involve black characters at all, and the Mexicans and Native Americans were often painted as villainous. And if you had a sympathetic Native American, they usually were played by a white actor, which this movie parodies with Mel Brooks himself playing a chief who speaks Yiddish.
They darker than us. Woof.
At the same time, 1974 was still fairly fresh off the Civil Rights Movement. This was only 10 years after the Civil Rights Act passed, which formally ended segregation, and 6 years removed from the assassination of MLK. Now, I wasn't there, obviously, but by all accounts, by all documentation and things available, the 70s were a pretty wild time where blatant racism was still pretty common. I mean, I think there's also the quality of just dealing with reality itself. You know, 1874, when this movie was set, was a harsh and nasty time. Today, I think we look at our past much more clearly, but in the 70s, in the just fresh fallout of the hippie movement, I think society was kind of still taking off its rose-tinted glasses and just starting to seriously grapple with our country's past. So, this movie set in that time throws the very real racism of the era in your face so pervasively that you cannot escape it or ignore it. There's no pretending that it's not there. It forces you to deal with it and feel some sort of way about it. And I think that's a big part of why this movie hits so hard. It has all the cleverness and silliness that would make Mel Brooks famous, but I feel like this movie has a bit more bite than most of his other ones. Probably the closest is the producers with their Springtime for Hitler scenes, but that's only a section of that movie. Now, I'll admit that I personally am a fan of gallows humor. As one of my favorite comedians, Anthony Jeselnik, describes it,
gallows humor is when you see something in the world that is so horrible that you have to laugh at it. Otherwise, it would destroy you.
When Mel Brooks is making jokes about Hitler and racism in this film, it's not because those things are funny. It is precisely because they are not. They are awful and horrifying. And for some of us, the only way we can really cognitively process this kind of stuff is to laugh at it. I know it's a concept not everyone really understands, but dark humor's like food. Not everyone gets it. This is also a good place to talk about the makers of this film. Obviously, Mel Brooks directed it and is one of the co-writers. And we have tons of his signature touches throughout this movie. Just the sheer variety of jokes with sex humor.
They're always coming and going and going and coming, and always too soon.
Wordplay.
Flooded with rivulets of thought, cascading into a waterfall of creative alternatives.
God darn it, Mr. Lamar. You use your tongue prettier than a $20 whore.
Pure absurdism.
Yeah, speed it up, so we ain't ever gonna get to Rock Ridge. Come on, move him through. God damn.
Looney Tunes slapstick violence.
Mungo like candy.
Violence, relentless fourth wall breaks,
Always like to keep my audience riveted.
and possibly the most infamous fart gag in all of Hollywood history. There are so many different jokes in this movie coming at you so quickly that at least some of them are bound to hit pretty much no matter what your sense of humor is. And for a lot of people, they're laughing so hard through the movie, they have to watch it a second time just because they missed half the jokes. But Mel Brooks was not the only writer on this film. There are several writers credited, and I don't want to take anything away from any of them, but the one name that really stands out is Richard Pryor.
And then the next day, this lady from the newspaper called one of my ex-wives and said, "What do you think's wrong with Richard?" She said, "I think he has AIDS." Guaranteeing that I will not get no sex to the year 2025.
Yeah, that Richard Pryor. Like Mount Rushmore, one of the all-time great stand-up comics, Richard Pryor, was a co-writer on this film. Now, Richard Pryor is old enough that I imagine there are some of you watching who know his name but don't really know him. So let me give you just a brief rundown. Richard Pryor was a bisexual black man born in the year 1940. His mom was a prostitute, his dad was a boxer and a pimp, and when they abandoned him and his siblings, they were raised in a brothel ran by his grandmother. He went on to have 5 marriages and several affairs with men, including Marlon Brando. He set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine and was covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns for the rest of his life. He had 3 heart attacks from said cocaine use, the 3 of which de-lifed him at the age of 65. Richard Pryor was a wild man. He was out there beyond the edges from birth, basically, in a way that very, very few of us can even really comprehend. And knowing that he was in the writer's room, egging them on to not hold back, I think explains a lot about just how far this movie goes.
Hey, boys! Look what I got here!
Hey, where are the white women at?
In fact, Pryor was supposed to play Bart. Now, there's some controversy about this. Mel Gibson has always sworn that the studio executives vetoed him, claiming that because of his drug arrest and things, he was too much of a liability and they couldn't insure him. But no studio executives have ever confirmed that story, and there's a lot of speculation that really he basically ran Pryor off because Mel Brooks wanted the credit for this movie. I wasn't there, I can't tell you exactly what happened, but it is interesting to note that Richard Pryor would go on to be a big movie star even after his infamous freebasing self-immolation. I guess this is a case where you can draw your own conclusions. Regardless of how we got there, Pryor was ultimately replaced by Cleavon Little, and that wasn't even the only kind of wonky casting. The co-lead, Jim the Waco Kid, an alcoholic gunslinger who befriends Bart, was originally supposed to be played by Western legend John Wayne. But John Wayne turned it down because of the blue material, and so then an actor named Gig Young was cast. Unfortunately, Mr. Young was a real-life alcoholic and collapsed from alcohol withdrawals his first day on set, And so quite literally at the last minute, Gene Wilder was flown in to replace him. Now, there is part of me that wishes Pryor had that role, but Cleavon Little is so goddamn charming in this movie that I can't be upset about it. And as for John Wayne, that would have been a fun bit of stunt casting, but I cannot imagine anyone other than Gene Wilder in this role. And there's no replicating the chemistry that these two had, so it definitely worked out for the best.
These are people of the land, the common clay of the New West. You know. Morons.
Funnily enough, Pryor and Wilder would end up co-starring in several comedies together after this, so all's well. Speaking of the cast, I also have to mention Madeline Kahn as Lily von Stoop, a German burlesque singer who tries to seduce Bart, but ends up getting seduced by Bart. She honestly doesn't have a ton to do, but she is the perfect mix of charming and funny, with one of the most over-the-top German accents you'll ever hear.
I'm not a rabbit. I need some rest.
And I imagine this movie is what led to her role in Young Frankenstein, where she worked with Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder again in a much larger role. And last but certainly not least, I absolutely love Harvey Korman as Hedley Lamar. He provides a lot of the wittier wordplay, and he is so clearly having the time of his life chewing up every bit of scenery he gets near.
My mind is aglow with whirling, transient nodes of thought, careening through a cosmic vapor of invention.
Ditto.
Ditto? Ditto, you provincial putz?
And if we're going to get overly analytical about this ridiculous movie, and we are going to get overly analytical about this ridiculous movie, it's actually really interesting to note that he's the primary villain, but it's also the only bad guy who's actually not racist. Like, if you pay attention, he never says anything negative about black people. He never shows any sign of a prejudice. I don't think he ever uses any slurs. He just doesn't care. The only color he cares about is green. So when he realizes he can make millions by building a railroad through the town of Rock Ridge, he appoints Bart as sheriff in the hopes that he will enrage the racist citizens so much they'll simply clear town. He may not be a racist, but he's happy to weaponize racism to line his own pockets. As silly and ridiculous as he is, that is a very chilling and banal brand of evil that we see in politicians and CEOs to this very day. As far as critiques or things I don't like about this movie, I could do without the Bane scene. I'm just not a big fan of toilet humor personally, but I understand why that's part of what makes this movie a classic, so fine. But more than that, when I was younger and saw this movie for the first time, I really didn't like the last act, because it just goes so off the rails, not even breaking the fourth wall so much as taking a nuke to the fourth wall. And since I've come to appreciate just how unrestrained silly it is, but just be prepared for a very unconventional ending to this movie. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in regards to this film is this idea that's brought up every time I see anyone talk about it, and that's the notion of whether or not this movie could be made today. And everyone always immediately says, oh, there's no way. You couldn't make this movie today. There's no way you could make this movie today. There's no way. I actually kind of want to push back about that, and I have a few reasons why. First off, whenever anyone says anything cannot be made today, two words immediately come to my mind. South Park. Not only is South Park still being made to this day, it's lost none of its bite. If anything, its recent seasons have been some of the most unhinged extreme content they've ever done.
I just want to go. This place is gross.
Would you like me to apply the baby oil to Satan's asshole, boss?
The next thing I think of is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
You gotta pay the troll toll. If you want to get into that boy's hole, you gotta pay the troll toll to get in.
That show has survived and even thrived through both liberal and conservative administrations, and has gone on to become the longest-lasting live-action sitcom of all time. Hell, just last year, I went to see The Book of Mormon in Portland, Oregon, one of the most politically correct cities in the world. And I had an auditorium full of people howling the entire time.
About us, on a deserted island, we'd swim naked in the sea, and then he'd try and it off. Like a light switch, there it's gone. My hetero side just won.
Good for you!
I'm all better now. Boys should be with girls, that's Heavenly Father's plan. So if you ever feel you'd rather be with a man, turn it off. Well,
to get very real with you guys, I don't think that highly of humans in general. My life experience has taught me repeatedly that most people are basically idiots. But I also believe in evidence, and audiences have proven time after time after time after time that content isn't really what matters. Context is. If this movie was using this kind of language to attack or belittle black people, that would be a completely different thing. But any vaguely rational person watching this can understand that, oh, no, they are clearly making these hateful racists look like complete idiots. This movie is mocking racism, not supporting it. This movie hates racism. You could not relentlessly mock something like this without some real sort of hatred fueling you. In fact, I would go so far as to argue it might actually be easier to make something like this today than it was back then. Like I said earlier, the 70s was not exactly a woke time. A full-throated attack on racism was not necessarily a popular idea, and this kind of content was unproven. Today, we've had successes like this that have helped pave the way. Honestly, the movie barely got put out back then at all. The only reason it got made was because Mel Brooks basically tricked the studio. He kept giving them false reports about the movie he was making, and when they saw the final cut, by all accounts, they were horrified. The movie only got released after they did a test screening and had an audience roaring with laughter the whole time. So the whole concept of attacking racism is a much more popular idea today. And at least a portion of the audience does pay attention to who's making the film and cares about that. It's an important factor. So imagine we had a similar setup today with a well-known Jewish comedic director, let's say Judd Apatow, directing a satirical Western with Dave Chappelle on the writing staff. Are you actually going to sit there and tell me that one, that movie would not get immediately greenlit just off the name power alone, and two, that it would not have some wild language and jokes? For all the talk about how woke Hollywood is, that might apply to the artists themselves, but not to the executives who are deciding what gets made. The only thing they care about is money. If movies get ultra progressive for a time period, it's because all their data and analytics are telling them that is what will make the most money. The second that their analytics tell them that a rom-com about a reincarnated Adolf Hitler seducing Greta Thunberg would make them $1 billion, they would make that movie in a heartbeat. And if you still don't believe me, let me point to a more recent film. It's actually kind of weirdly similar. It's also a Western starring a white gunslinger and a black former slave. It's not a comedy per se, but it is filled with dark humor, including gratuitous use of a certain word. And the movie I'm describing, of course, is Django Unchained. This came out in 2012, smack dab in the middle of the Obama administration, in a time that was arguably more woke and progressive than today is. It went on to make about $450 million at the global box office and was nominated for 5 Academy Awards and won 2, including Best Original Screenplay. So please, tell me more about how a movie like this cannot be made today. The fact is, I think a lot of creatives out there just don't have any balls, and it's easier to just vaguely gesture a wokeness than it is to actually try. I said what I said. So in conclusion, I think Blazing Saddles is not only one of the just purely funniest movies ever made, but I also think it's a really important one that shows us what happens when artists are actually willing to utilize our right to free speech. And in a time when just open racism and white supremacy seems to be becoming more and more mainstream, its message is as important as ever. This is a brave and hysterical film, and I highly recommend it. So those are my thoughts on Blazing Saddles. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. I'm sure there could be some interesting discussions about this movie. Remember that a like and subscribe really helps this channel grow. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Until then, stay sane, stay human.